Sam. Thank you very much. Thank you to the Turing Institute for inviting me. I'm based in Toronto, and we have a small team there for BuzzFeed News, which, if you're not familiar with BuzzFeed News, we are the news division that's part of BuzzFeed, which also has lots of entertainment, people and video producing content there. We have about 250 journalists around the world. And our little team of weirdos are focused on all of the ways that people are manipulating and deceiving in the digital environment. And so kind of as part of that work, we encounter a lot of disinformation campaigns and tactics. We investigate things like ad fraud. We look at basically any way people are exploiting all these kind of new and wonderful information technologies that we have. And so tonight I kind of want to take you on a tour of a lot of the things that we see. The things that I think the average person is encountering more and more, and also look at some of the motivations and some of the impacts that these things can have. And so with that, I want to tell you sort of 3 stories about these kinds of things that are going on that I think speak to some of the larger trends that we're seeing. The first one is in a town called Vellas in Macedonia. You might be familiar with sort of the Macedonian teens. This was a story that we did in late 2016 that ended up capturing a lot of attention at the time. I went and visited the town of Vellas a couple of summers ago, and I went up on this mountain with a few local journalists to kind of look at the town, and this is one of the best places to get a view of it. And you can see here off in the distance, there's this building, and this is actually a factory. This at one point was really the pride of Vellas. It was the major employer there, this factory. They had competed with a lot of other towns. This was in the former Yugoslavia to kind of win and get this factory there, and this was a big thing. And it remained the main employer there until a while ago when an investigative journalist, a local journalist, started looking into the factory and realized that their toxic waste was being dumped close by. That was creating air pollution problems, that was creating problems with the water supply. And so as a result of that, eventually, not right away, but eventually the plant closed down. And so the major economic engine of the town went away. And over time, particularly for the young people of the town, they started to find a new way to earn income. And what happened was a lot of them took an internet marketing course, that's how it was described, from a guy in the capital of Macedonia. And he taught them how to choose a niche, to create websites for it, to run Facebook pages, and to do a whole bunch of things that often veered into completely unscrupulous things in order to get eyeballs to your website in order to make money for advertising. And so there were health websites, there were motorcycle websites, muscle car websites, largely targeting the English language market because that's where you could earn a lot more money. Rather than doing something for the Macedonian market with a small amount of people, you go for the global market where a US or UK reader is worth a lot more for an ad than someone in Macedonia. And then as we got into 2015, a guy launched the first political site there, was a Trump fan. He was actually a media lawyer working in the capital in Skopje, but his brother was in Vellas, and they launched the first site. And by the time I started looking into this in the summer of 2016, this was the kind of stuff that they were publishing. These were completely false stories, largely going pro-Trump, anti-Hillary Clinton. And even though the guy who started the first site was kind of inclined to like Trump, it was all about business. They didn't actually care who won. They didn't necessarily have strong political leanings. What mattered to them was what content was going to perform best on Facebook, what was going to get people to react on Facebook, which would then make the algorithms decide what to show that, who to show content to, pick that particular article because it was sending off the signals that, oh, people are really liking this and sharing this. And so, we ended up talking to a bunch of people who were there. Some of them were as young as 16. And I asked one guy, I was like, you realize that when we did the stats and we looked at the best performing articles from these sites, 4 out of 5 were completely false. And they were the ones that performed best on Facebook. And this is what one of the guys said. He said, yes, they know that they're false. They know that they're, misleading. But the rationale is that if it gets the people to click on it and engage, then you use it. And most of the time they were copying and pasting stuff and maybe tweaking the headline a little bit and sometimes poorly copying and pasting so they didn't even get the whole article there. But it didn't really matter. As long as the headline worked, that's what they needed. And so it was this kind of pure expression of what was really working on Facebook and also what was performing best when it came to content around the US election. And we learned that not from what Americans were doing, but what a bunch of teenagers and young men in Macedonia were doing. And I think one of the lessons from this is that a lot of times the people who are winning in this information environment are the ones who know how to best exploit these systems. that are now in charge of deciding what you're going to see, deciding how many people are going to see a particular thing. The systems like the newsfeed in Facebook, which is governed by an algorithm, are in effect, the arbiters of attention in our society now. Second story involves this delicious, maybe a little over-the-top hamburger. So a group of researchers decided to look at food photos on Instagram. And they just wanted to see, like, what are people sharing and what works and what doesn't work. And so initially, a lot of the stuff that they were studying were, people like they made a nice breakfast for their family, so they take a photo of it. They go to a restaurant, they take a photo of their meal, We've all seen the people in restaurants. They're like, they sit down, they do that before they touch anything. But what they found was over time, as people, shared their stuff, my regular breakfast doesn't really do it anymore. I'm not going to get a lot of likes for that. And so over time, things started to get a little more out of the box, a little more extreme. And eventually you end up with like a quadruple decker hamburger drenched in cheese and menu items literally existing just so they can be Instagrammed, right? And people coming to restaurants just to order things and Instagram them. And what they came away with was, a conclusion that the average person, without really realizing it, they started playing to the algorithms. And so the algorithms that drove what got distributed to more people, the algorithms that helped you get more likes for something and more comments for something, they were really driving people and favoring the odd and the unusual. And if somebody wanted to get something that, went viral on their own scale and get out of their small group of friends, it started to lead them to the extreme. And I think it's true for food photos on Instagram, but it's been true and proven again and again on these platforms that the more extreme, the more unusual, the more over the top. It doesn't necessarily have to be negative. It could be something that makes you extremely happy or extremely uplifting, but that's what tends to win out in a very information-saturated environment. So the last story is kind of a story in sort of 1.5 images. This is the first image. This is a graph showing the fans for the USA Today Facebook page in 2017, from October till about the end of April. Now, if I'm the social media manager at USA Today and I'm showing this to my bosses, I can't wait for end-of-year reviews because, like, this is really good. You are absolutely going to get a raise if this is what's happening. But they were actually really unhappy about it. And the reason is that as they got, as they more than doubled the amount of fans they had over a period of just a few months, nothing actually changed. So they got all these new fans who were really excited, but the same amount of people were commenting, the same amount of people were sharing stuff, were liking stuff. And so they started to become actually really suspicious. They said, we have all these new fans, our page looks massive, but the rate of engagement is exactly the same. There's something wrong with these fans. And eventually they went so far as actually to report it to the FBI. And so their first step was to report it to Facebook, as you could imagine. So they went to Facebook, and Facebook looked into it. And here's what they found. They found that some people operating, I think it was largely in Bangladesh, but in some other overseas countries, had been creating fake Facebook accounts en masse. And the way you make a fake account look real and passable is you get it to like a bunch of pages, you get it to post statuses, you steal a photo or two, you put that up, so it sort of passes the sniff test. And so they had programmed into these fake accounts to go and like the USA Today Facebook page, but they never programmed them to go like any of their content or engage with it. So it was this huge, giant red flag for USA Today. And so Facebook looked into it, and USA Today ended up losing some of those new fans, which seems like a sad end to the story, but that's actually a much better scenario for USA Today, to have real people engaging with their content. But this is a problem across the board when it comes to digital media. There is so much fakery going on. There are so many fake accounts that are programmed a lot more intelligently than these ones were, who will actually engage with things, who will talk to you, who will engage with you. And it's very, very difficult to separate that out from the real stuff. And so, the three takeaways from that initial thing for me is, like, one, obviously we have these systems that are increasingly governing what gets attention, what gets distributed. And they're complicated systems, and they're very opaque. We don't really know how they're making their decisions, even though the companies give us some general guidance. The second thing is that we do see the people who kind of understand them, who manipulate them, who understand, the idea of giving more extreme content, often veering into false or misleading content. They understand that that gets reactions, which causes people to engage with things, and they're exploiting that again and again, and not just on Facebook, but on many platforms, as you'll see. And the final thing is that the things we're familiar with now, like so-called fake news and maybe bots and other things like that have gotten to the sort of general consciousness, they're a small piece of what's going on. And that's kind of what I want to go through, is to give you a sense of how, so much of what you touch in the digital environment, so much of what you engage with is easily manipulated, is actively being exploited, and in many cases is part of, huge amounts of criminality that's going on, which is, again, a piece I think that gets missed a lot. So I'm going to take you on a terrible journey now. We're going to sort of climb the ladder of manipulation, going from like basic stuff all the way up to really more advanced, 100% completely synthetic things that are really starting to draw concern for people, but that also give us a peek of sort of where things might be going. Simple level media manipulation today is what is generally referred to as trolling. So this is the guy who runs a virulently anti-immigrant white nationalist organization called Identity Europa. And so he posted this photo in November saying basically, hey, I'm hanging out at the White House. And so you can imagine people saw this and they're like, what the hell did this guy get invited to the White House? So some reporters reached out to the White House, to him, to say, were you invited? Were you participating in an event? What was going on here? And so you can see, like, he got a decent amount of retweets and likes out of it, probably more than that from when we captured this screenshot. And eventually, he posted a tweet and he said, no, I was just there for a public event that anyone could get a ticket to, right? And so the troll here, the first level of the troll, is making people think that he's been invited by the White House and getting attention for that, right? Getting journalists to reach out to the White House to get comment, to basically turn himself into a story. So he's like, oh, I was there. And then he calls out the journalists who actually did the work of figuring out what this guy was doing at the White House, to say basically they were gullible losers for trying to figure out what he was doing there. So he got them to spend their time and spend other people's attention on this and elevate it. And if you look at this smaller tweet under here, this couldn't have turned out more fantastically. The left, faux conservatives, and mainstream media all fell for it, just as planned. Now, did he actually plan? It's possible, but it's also him just completely capitalizing on this to make it seem like what happened was his devious, brilliant plan all along, right? Trying to take credit for everything on this, like he was playing, 4D chess or what have you. And so that's like a basic kind of level of trolling that we see. Another thing that happened, like this was during the most recent French national elections, we saw a lot of far-right trolls, people who pull pranks online, spread disinformation online, hanging out in a private space called a Discord server, which is mainly a chat app for gamers, and actually trying to plan campaigns of how they could get stuff to trend on Twitter that would support the far-right candidate in France. So we have, far-right trolls in the United States reaching out to far-right trolls in France, hanging out in a private space, planning trolling campaigns and disinformation campaigns. And again, this is about humans trying to get other humans' attention and using these systems any way that they can. And this is a quote from a guy named Microchip, who actually would run Twitter bots. And he basically talks about how they would come up with over-the-top things to try and get journalists to cover it. And they would love it even when journalists like us would debunk them, because they still wasted our time. They still forced us to give them their attention. And it's amazing to me where he talks about how we should have already figured this out and stopped covering them. But we kind of can't resist. And this is a problem that a lot of newsrooms are really dealing with right now, is that when do you give attention to things, even when you're trying to warn people about it? Are you giving them even more oxygen? This is one to get into the realm of kind of humans and machines interacting. So many of us, we shop on Amazon, right? Amazon has an epidemic of fake reviews. If that wasn't something you were already familiar with, you need to sort of have your guard up as you're reading these things. There are Facebook groups and tons of other places online where people hang out, and basically someone who's got a product that they've made comes into the group and says, hey, I need 10 people to review this product from the United States, and they'll send it to them for free. The people then review it using their real Amazon account, and in some cases they give them some additional money, or at the very least they get to keep the product for free. And of course, they don't actually want a real review, they just want them to post something positive. And it can even get to the extent where when there's a trusted relationship between the fake reviewer and the product person, they'll actually have the reviewer buy the product with their own money and then reimburse them later, so it gets the verified purchase thing on it. So even when you're looking at reviews and you see verified purchase, some of that might actually be a fake reviewer. And that's the other image here, is somebody saying, oh, I have a competing product. Can I get a bunch of one-star reviews, fake one-star reviews, to knock this down? And one of those things is obviously just you going to the page of that product and trying to decide whether you should buy it or not. But part of it is also that Amazon, depending on what you're searching, chooses which products to show, in some cases based on what people have paid to advertise, but also in a lot of ways based on things like the number of positive reviews they have and their sales trends over the last 24 hours, 30 days. So by doing this, you not only can sort of convince a human who's looking at it, but they also send signals to an algorithm to say, hey, our product is really popular and people are really happy with it. And I think sort of the classic 100% false, economically oriented fake news fits into that category as well. You have, whether it's teens in Macedonia, this was a young guy in Kosovo who created this completely false article with very poor grammar in the headline. I always feel I have to point that out, being a journalist. And they're creating other content or copying other content for humans, but the end goal is to get those humans to react so that it sends a signal to Facebook's algorithms to say, hey, you need to show this to more people. So we're creating stuff for humans in order to get humans to act that in ways that will also trigger algorithms. And this is sort of what's happening more and more in our society. When you don't have the ability to go after humans or target humans first, you can very easily just buy a bunch of fake humans online. This is very easy. This is not a how-to section. Don't go out and just Google fake Twitter accounts. But if you were to do that, you would see it's very easy to buy them. It's very easy to buy views, fake accounts, very easy to buy retweets, likes, favorites, shares, all of that. There is a marketplace for that. I bought like 100 accounts for I think less than $10, and I basically was just sent a text file with the username, the password, and the phone number that it was linked to, because they will actually buy SIM cards and connect a phone number to all of their fake accounts, because that's more likely to pass Twitter's initial kind of test to see whether an account is real or not. And I showed you that quote from Microchip. This is an example of very rudimentary bots from him. So these were bots that he was using to help spread the conspiracy theory that Seth Rich, a former DNC staffer, had actually been murdered by the Clintons and high-ranking Democrats. And this is rudimentary because these accounts don't even have user images. They seem to have names attached to them, but the name doesn't match the username. And of course, they're all tweeting the exact same thing. And you would look at this, and the average person would say, okay, this is clearly problematic. I don't think that's a real person. But this wasn't necessarily meant for humans. This was meant for the algorithms that decide what trends on Twitter. So the goal here was to basically bomb a hashtag with enough tweets in a short period of time to make Twitter's algorithm decide that, oh, Seth Rich is a popular topic that people are talking about. We should make that trend. And then when real users log into Twitter, they see, oh, that Seth Rich thing, maybe this really is a thing. So many people are talking about it. Maybe he really was murdered by the Clintons. And so he's trying to mess with Twitter systems, and he's also trying to mess with your mind through getting access to that system. Here's a video. Let's watch this video. OK, there, the video's playing. So nothing's happening. It's not a glitch. This is actually the video. At some point, there we go. OK, so they removed some words because they needed to do that in video. So what's going on here? So this was a video on just like a silly kind of memes page. A few years ago, Facebook told everybody video is a big thing. Native video, upload your video to Facebook. This is a big deal. Lots of media companies like ran and hired tons of video people. I know, like we did it. And then, something was supposed to happen. Nothing really happened, except that in terms of money. But what did happen was that Facebook promoted the hell out of video. And so if you wanted to get engagement on your Facebook page, to have your posts travel very far, to maybe get into the news feed of new people so they might like your page, so that you could get more views for your video, you needed to have video to do this. And so a page like this that used to just post a static meme like that and do really well, all of a sudden realized, we need to do video, but we have no resources to do video. Let's take a static meme and just turn it into a video that has basically 25 seconds of dead air. And if you see in the bottom corner there, this video got 11 million views. So 11 million views for that. Obviously, there's no reason why average, regular people would want to watch that video to completion. They've been tricked into watching it. And as they've been tricked into watching it because it auto-plays, Facebook's signals get the sense that lots of people are watching this video. This is a really popular video. And before you know it, This thing has 11 million views and over 88,000 reactions on it. And so this is a way for them to keep their page growing by completely gaming the system. And Facebook eventually found a way to kind of stop this, but it was something that was spotted by us, by journalists, before their own systems picked it up. This is one of my favorites. Please enjoy the beauty of this Instagram photo. It's remarkable. It has over 1,500 likes. It is so attractive, right? And also, I like the comments, too. My favorite one is the one that says, "I like the colors used for this photo." Clearly, somebody has really appreciated it. So this one is my favorite because it has like 4 levels of awfulness, okay? So the first level is you have real people with Instagram accounts, and they go and they sign up to a service that's going to give them, that's going to pay them, okay? And it's going to pay them if they give over the logins to their Instagram account, which is a very bad idea. Don't give people your logins to your Instagram account. And so what would happen is somebody like our friend Viral Hippo, which was one of our BuzzFeed News reporters, would go to this service and say, "Hey, I've just uploaded a new photo. I would like to purchase 1,500 likes and a certain number of comments." And then what happens is the service goes and uses its credentials to log into 1,500 or so real people's accounts and get them to like this photo and to add some comments to it. And so if you're Instagram, or if you're someone like us trying to figure out if, why a black square would get 1,500 likes and comments about colors, you're going to look at it and you're going to investigate the accounts that left those comments, that liked it, and they're all going to look like real accounts because they are, but they're real accounts who were automated in order to trick other humans so that the algorithms would see other humans liking this as well. And so, I mean, the way I expressed it was humans being turned into bots to trigger algorithms to reach other humans, which is like, the future is terrible if you think about that. Like, this is where we are. And so that's the extent that it's going. And this interplay between what we're doing and how people are manipulating these platforms, and in their head, they're not just thinking about reaching other people, they're also thinking about triggering these algorithms. They're also thinking about getting these systems to be tricked as well. So you can't just trick humans today, you also need to trick algorithms. And that's kind of the next level of manipulation that people are really working on. So when I think about these examples, I think about this pizza box, which became a meme and was kind of popular a few years ago. It looks like you're getting a good cheese and pepperoni pizza. You open it up and this is what you're actually getting, right? Like, it looks like that account got a bunch of likes. It looks like that hashtag is trending, but it's actually just completely fabricated. And so this is what happens. You kind of peek under the hood of the pizza, and this is what you're left with. And this is the experience that we have again and again and again as we look into this stuff, that if you kind of scratch the surface, if you just lift it up a little bit, there is so much that is being gamed. There is so much deception that's going on, and it is reaching the average person because these platforms are so ubiquitous. This was a comment from a guy who's the chief scientist at a company called White Ops, which specializes in investigating bots, particularly in digital advertising, which we'll talk about in a second. And for him, he sort of expressed the same thing about how these things get hacked. But in fairness, I should probably show you the earlier and far more popular meme because journalists are kind of guilty of this too, right? The kind of bait and switch of a headline. You think it's really great, and then you go to the article and it's complete crap. This was the original meme that did really, really well. The machine learning one, maybe not surprisingly, didn't get as many likes, but nevertheless was true. And the fact that he investigates bots is really important. This was a recent tweet by a former chief digital officer of the United States. And this is the really horrible, frightening truth, is that most days, the majority of traffic on the internet is bots. It's not humans. In particular, for sometimes on certain services where there is an active kind of attack going on, you could see a huge percentage of bots to humans. And it's not always malicious. Bots can be useful. They can be helpful. These can be automated services that are running, taking up some traffic on the internet, completely normal. But that's not the majority of what these bots are. The majority of these bots are absolutely engaged in things that are often meant to either steal money or trick humans or kind of do a combination of the both. And so the hope here is a hope I have for this year that we sort of start to realize this, and all of us take this into account as we see things and we see metrics and likes and shares, that we start to realize how easily this stuff is gamed and how pervasive things like bots really are. And on that point, I mentioned digital advertising. This was an investigation I did in October, which I'll break down for you. But the bottom line was that this group of fraudsters, 2 of whom had experience in digital advertising, 2 of whom had experience running servers, came together to eventually collect more than 125 Android apps and websites and steal what one insider in an email I obtained estimated to be hundreds of millions of dollars over the last few years. When we published this story, I had taken it to Google ahead of time, and Google admitted that $10 million had been stolen from it and its partners over the last sort of 2 years, and they ended up actually refunding that money to people as a result of it. And this is another example of kind of the human and bot connection. So here's the breakdown of how this works. The first thing is these guys created a front company to go out and acquire apps from real app developers. So you made a game, they would go out, they'd offer you really good money for it, they'd buy it. What they wanted was, your game's reputation, that people already had heard of it, but more than anything, they wanted the real humans who were already using it. They didn't need a lot of humans, but they needed some. And so they would then take time to watch what your human users were doing. And they basically recorded things like what countries they were coming from, what phones they were using, how long they spent in the game. And the whole point of this was to basically record that and to start to see what these humans were doing. At the same time, it went from being owned by this one developer to one of the many shell companies they created. And so they're watching the humans and watching the humans. And then what they start to do is they take that human behavior and they replay it into bots that they had programmed. So they were actually copying what real humans were doing and then creating bots to mimic those humans so that they could then basically have unlimited traffic. Amount of humans, this amount in the app, and then they could double it, they could triple it, and it was literally just like some lines of code. It was so easy for them, once they had the technology to clone the human audience, they basically could send unlimited traffic to these apps. And they had to be careful about not being too greedy, because if the app was not a very popular game and not a very good game, but suddenly it was like #1 and beating Fortnite or what have you, that would probably raise some suspicions. But they basically could add as much traffic to it as they wanted. And they blended it with the humans, which meant that the automated detection systems that are used just thought it was more humans, right? Because the baseline was these were humans, but now they're bots pretending like humans. And basically then it's just a cash machine. And so we're talking of at least tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars that these guys were able to steal. And so it is absolutely an industry. There will probably be about $15 to $20 billion this year stolen out of digital advertising. By complete 100% crooks. And that's a number that is approaching like the global drug trade, but it doesn't really get as much attention. That's how bad this has gotten. So they were using humans and creating bots from the humans. Where we're headed is you won't need any humans to start at all. So these are not real people. These are faces that were generated by artificial intelligence. So they fed photos of real people into a system, which then sort of learned how those people looked and then just started kind of freelancing and auto-generating other faces. So if you were to try and, if this was the face of somebody who was said to be the CEO of one of the shell companies that these fraudsters had set up, I wouldn't be able to find any other photos of this person, but I also wouldn't be able to conclusively say, oh, this was a stock image that they had bought, which was one way when we were unraveling the scheme that we were able to sort of prove that they had a lot of fraudulent things going on. And so these are faces, and if you look at the progress in just the last few years, faces that were generated 2 or 3 years ago were really kind of poor. These ones could absolutely pass. And there's no way to really know where they came from. You couldn't reverse search it and find out, oh, this is a photo they stole from somewhere else. There are, however, some clues. As much as it's getting better, a guy named Kyle McDonald talked about how to spot things. So like this guy has 2 different eye colors, which some humans do have, but is not that common. The eyes are very different if you look in the middle of the one, like the shape of them and everything like that. What's going on with her earrings over there is a very strange puzzle. It's trying to guess things. And so over time, like now we could still spot some things, but over time we won't be able to. Over time, it's going to be indistinguishable, and we're going to have to think about what our information environment is going to be like when it's this easy to fabricate things like that. Another example is we've heard about deepfakes. So this technology can generate someone's face onto someone else's face, and one of the uses that people decided to come up for that was like Nicolas Cage as Indiana Jones. is this going to offend everyone that he's James Bond? I don't know. I don't want to start a riot in here. And him in American Psycho, him as a female lead in one of the recent Superman movies. And so like this is often what happens with kind of new tech like this. So people play around with it and they kind of joke around and maybe they troll a little bit and they do things like that. And then certainly you think about how to make money from it, but also people use it for much more disconcerting things. Like right now there are sites online where you can pay money and hand over a photo of someone and they will put that person in porn videos, for example. And so women are being harassed by men who know them, who pay to have their faces put into porn. Initially, it was done with a lot of Hollywood actors, where they were suddenly being put into porn. And so you can see how quickly it's like technology moves from sort of a gee whiz, that's kind of awesome thing, into the applications where it's kind of silly and it's kind of fun, but then it's things like harassment and it's things like manipulation and other things like that. And this is kind of the path that we seem to follow again and again and again. And if we're not able to kind of detect these things and unpack them, this is going to completely start to take over our information environment. This is an example also of kind of, people, what I love are ingenious ways of evading the algorithms. So this is a machine here. Does anyone want to guess what's going on here? Does anybody know what this machine is for? So some health plans have a minimum steps requirement, right? To like get a better health rate. So you can buy these in China. That's pretty awesome, huh? So you'll see there are like videos and photos of people in China sitting in a cafe like smoking and eating, and they're getting their steps, right? And it's brilliant. There are examples like that where people are trying to kind of, worm their way through these systems and undermine these systems for their own personal benefit, which you sort of have to love. And this was the first place I saw it when this guy, tweeted this, where you can, and often the cafes are like providing them for you. Yes, come in, sit down, don't worry, you're gonna hit your steps for today. And so this is a great way of kind of manipulating it. And because I realized, like, I spent so much time in the dark place, at least give you something that's somewhat, light. And so there are examples of this, but the reality is, like, so many of the things in our life are going to be governed by systems like this. And so when we look at media, we look at what's happening in information. In some ways, it's really the canary in the coal mine. Your health insurance, whether you get a mortgage, all of these things are increasingly being decided by formulas that you can't really see, that you don't know that they're even there. All you know is you didn't get that mortgage. All you know is your health insurance rate went up. And it's because your formula was bad. It's because you were flagged by a system. And if you don't understand the system, if you don't even know that it's there, I mean, how can you actually improve your state in it? And this is having real effects on people's lives. And so the awareness of this and the demand to actually have these systems be more transparent, I think, is a really, really important thing for all of us. One, to have that awareness, and the second is to really advocate for this whenever we can. This is the truth, is that as they become more part of our lives, as they become integrated into more things that decide things about our lives, about our social mobility, about our economic situation, the ability of people to manipulate them may become the difference between the haves and the have-nots. The ability for people to understand them becomes the difference between the haves and the have-nots. And the effects of manipulation and exploitation can become that much scarier. And in some ways, we'll notice it. In other ways, we won't. We'll just, like, our situation will just get worse, and we won't really know why. And somebody may actually be actively causing that system to behave that way. So I've laid out the horribleness. I do think there's, a few things that we should keep in mind. One, if you are a person who builds these systems, you have to think about how they will be exploited and how they'll be manipulated. This is one of the big flaws that a lot of the tech companies had, is they built these systems, but they weren't necessarily thinking of these somewhat edge cases of how people would exploit something. And they're getting better about that. They're now hiring teams to kind of interrogate the things that they're building, but it still has to really take over to think about all the ways that something can be gamed. The second thing is that I think too often a lot of the people who build these systems, like, they think about, well, what's our overall accuracy rate of this machine learning algorithm or what have you? What's the overall health of our platform? And that scale piece is really important because they're so big, but a lot of times this kind of manipulation is happening at a scale that will seem tiny compared to, say, the 2 billion people that log in every month on Facebook, but it's having real-world repercussions. It's having real-world harm. So you have to think about the really small cases as well as looking at your overall system. And I think, again, that's something that sometimes gets missed. Not surprisingly, I think that it's essential for every journalist to understand, at the very least, everything I went through there, and also to understand how you do things like see if a photo has been photoshopped, to reverse image something, to not take what you see on social networks as face value and just throw it into an article and write it up like this is actually what people's sentiment is, because you don't know that. Everything that you see, you have to question. And I think journalists can play a really important role in helping guide people, but I also think that it's a challenge for every single person in society to be aware of this stuff, to have that level of skepticism raised, and to really think about how you can have a certain level of understanding and knowledge about this so that you can protect yourself, but also demand better from the products you use, from your representatives, from the companies you interact with. That's one way to get them to do a better job with all of these things and to protect you better, is to actually show that this is something you care about and you're advocating. And the downside, of course, is that we end up with an information environment that is just rife with fakes, that is rife with disinformation, where you can't tell the real from the fake, where the things that decide what happens in your financial life and your personal life are completely out of your control. A future that, as you saw earlier, looks pretty ugly. So thank you very much.
Thank you for that wonderful talk. It's time now for some questions from the audience.
One of the points I noticed was that all your political examples showed the extreme right wing. Is it only the right wing that does this? Does the left wing do this at all? And if so, why were there no left wing examples of this?
So the short answer is yes. They do it as well. The longer answer is that from the research that we've been doing and from research that other people like Yochai Benkler at Harvard and others have done, there seems to be a difference between the liberal and mainstream media ecosystems, and especially in the United States, the conservative and even further right-wing media ecosystems. And so by no means is it one side and not the other. But one of the things that a lot of conservatives have held for a long time is that the media is more left-leaning, doesn't reflect their point of view, it doesn't have enough representation of them. And I think those have actually been legitimate beefs in a lot of ways. And one of the results of that is that at a certain point, I think a lot of conservatives, and I'm based in Canada, but inevitably we cover a lot of stuff in the US, they just decided to kind of build their own media ecosystem. And so they were very early when it came to blogs, when it came to cable news. And so in some ways you could sort of look at it as they've been innovative in adapting to new media models. And the result is that the kind of completely separate conservative and right-wing media ecosystem, it's a little more detached when you look at network maps and things like that than the liberal media ecosystem. And when you are separated like that, you do tend to start to get more extreme. There is, factors that have been documented where, the more you're surrounded by people who have the same point of view as you, the more extreme your views get. And so I think there's an element of having this, a little more closed-off ecosystem for people from the right that has also created a bigger, more extreme ecosystem. There are lots of completely, great, strong conservative journalists who do good work. There is also, does seem to be, if we look at YouTube, if we look at Facebook, if we look at Twitter, there is a bigger, more extreme right-wing ecosystem where there are conspiracy theories and disinformation taking flight. But the last thing I would say is, like, the election of Donald Trump has created a boom in liberal misinformation in the United States. Like, you are seeing the same kind of conspiratorial thinking, and conspiracy theories that are taking hold on the left, and it's been really wild to watch that, because I think it shows that it's not actually about your ideology. It is about what's going on in your media ecosystem, and it's also about how strong are your emotions, and how much do you hate or feel separated from what's going on, and that will help sort of push you to the extreme. But it's a good point that I should include some of those examples.
There's a question there.
Hi, thank you for a really interesting talk. I was quite, on your last slide you were talking about how we can address some of the challenges which we're facing today. Do you think there's a role for regulation and in fact actually for changing incentives? Because that seems to me something that's pretty underlying, the profit incentive, the business models that depend upon getting eyeballs on a page, the advertising models. Before Google, we didn't have these issues. And these business models have been made and then developed and cemented in stone to the point where they encourage this kind of behavior, which we're then trying to address as a secondary measure. So I just wondered about your thoughts on that.
So on regulation, there's already been a lot of bad laws. Oh, sorry. Okay. On regulation, there's already been some very bad laws passed in some of the places around the world where they've basically, authoritarian governments have used, fake news as a reason to clamp down on the opposition and media. So I'm pretty wary in general of regulation, but what I'm a big fan of is the threat of regulation. Because I think these companies do not want to be regulated, even though they've sort of started to come around realizing, hey, this might actually be happening. But the idea that they will be regulated, the idea that if they don't get their shit together, then there could be legislation, that actually I think is a very effective way of getting them to act. Of course, you can only take the threat so far if you're not actually going to do it. So that is one thing that I would endorse, that I think government should really, your Commons Committee here was very good. Like compared to the hearings in the US, what happened here was a lot better. And I think that applied a lot of pressure that the companies like Facebook and Google and others have taken seriously. So I think that's good. On the incentives piece, it's definitely not new for media organizations to go to the extreme and be rewarded financially for that. It's not new to have a business model, like we've all seen the tabloids, we've all seen how that's been around for a long time. And very early newspapers, once they moved to the mass model of trying to gather an audience to get money from advertising rather than primarily subscriber driven, that's where we saw a lot of this stuff start to begin, particularly in the 1830s in the US. So the model has sort of been there, but I agree with you in that this has poured gasoline all over that fire. And it's everywhere. And at this point, even Mark Zuckerberg has acknowledged that some of the incentives are really off, particularly with what's getting rewarded on Facebook. The problem is that I think it's really hard for them to change that. It's one, they're a publicly traded company, they need to hit their numbers. So you're right, that model is difficult. The second piece is that about 2 years ago, I talked to a Facebook product manager who'd been hired to work on these kinds of issues. And he said very plainly to me, yes, we have to switch it so that the incentive is actually towards higher quality content, towards at least credible kind of content. And he recognized that the incentive was the other way. Well, it's 2 years later, Facebook has hired a lot of engineers, has actually invested a fair amount in this, and they still haven't figured it out. So I think that I don't expect them to just suddenly the penny to drop and it's fixed. There is a mix of the economic model. There's a mix of the fact that their system is really built on engagement. How you fix that, I don't have an easy answer for that. Yeah.
Hi. I want to ask, how easy is it to spot the difference between bots and fake accounts if you don't have access to the insights like USA Today did? How easy is it for a researcher or a journalist to kind of gather evidence that there is bots somewhere?
If I could sort of add to that,
yeah.
Because this is a Turing lecture. There's this thing called the Turing test, which is can a human tell a bot and machine and a human apart?
Right.
Have these guys sort of solved the Turing test? I mean, it's probably a more profitable version of the Turing test than
right.
it's being able to tell.
Yeah. So I mean, on the short answer is it depends. Sometimes it's actually really, really easy. Like the example of the microchip bots. If you had seen one of those, you would probably naturally, without needing any training or anything, say, well, they don't have a profile photo, and they're tweeting this thing with 4 hashtags in it. That's that seems a bit weird. And so there's some stuff on a really basic level, like if you go to a Twitter account, do they have a photo? How long has that account been around for? Not a pure sign that it's a fake account. And what are they talking about? What are they tweeting? And if you look at, how quickly are they tweeting things? Are they just are they doing 150 or 1,000 tweets a day? Is this something that you think a human would sit there and do? There are some basic questions that you can sort of ask as you look at a Twitter account or a Facebook account. You can, reverse image search their profile photo to see if that's a photo, if it seems to be them claiming that's them. Where else does that photo exist online? Reverse image search is probably the most useful skill you could have, to be honest. And I hope everybody, if you don't know what it is, just look it up and you'll see. And then you can get into more advanced analysis of, looking at over time, how much are they tweeting per day? Do they tend to tweet the same links over and over and over again? But the truth is that with the Turing test, I mean, it's getting more and more complicated to spot bots. At one point when I was talking to Microchip, and I was sort of talking about where bots were going, he was talking about things called word spinners, which is you can basically enter, a sentence or a block of text into this, and it will scramble it for you. But it will scramble it in a way where it still says the same thing in a grammatically correct way. So instead of Microchip having, 100 or 1,000 accounts tweeting the exact same thing with the exact same hashtags, he could spin that same sentence, that same sentiment in 1,000 different ways, have them all seem like they were actually said by a human, and he's just taken that message and made it seem like it's not all the same account copying it. And that's actually a very rudimentary level thing. You can get far more advanced from that. You can program bots so that they're tweeting links with an hour in between them from a variety of 50 different websites, and that might look like somebody who just reads a lot of news. So there are some basic tests of like looking at the account and just asking yourself, would a human behave this way? But then there are things where you do have to do some kind of computational things to analyze it. If you want a tool, it's not foolproof, but there's a thing called Botometer. It's run by University of Indiana. I know a lot of researchers use it. It's not perfect, but they look at, I think, 100 or 200 different characteristics of a Twitter account and their last 200 tweets to give you a score. So there are some things that can assist you in that case, too.
Let's go to this side for a question.
How effective do you think that adversarial or moderated discussion groups are, where there is a possibility of deep conversations and the people in the group may well be quite motivated to identify fake stories? So I saw with the giant cheese hamburger from Instagram, I quite enjoyed looking at a subreddit called Sushi Abomination, which is about sushi that shouldn't exist. But it really hasn't gone the same way over a year, and that's because the people are, in many of there's a huge pool of bad Reddits to good Reddits.
Yeah.
People are pretty exercised about identifying fakes and this community identification. How effective do you think that is, and do you have any thoughts about that?
I mean, I think an engaged, focused, especially a specialized community where people have a specific expertise or a specific passion for a hobby or something like that, I think they can be tremendously effective. I mean, there are certainly examples where kind of, amateur sleuths have gone completely awry, and people who live in kind of conspiracy groups will also, force each other even further down the rabbit hole. So it can absolutely work in really positive ways where you have people working together, where you have people sharing their expertise. And it's like, isn't it warm your heart? Like, that's what we all thought the internet was going to be all the time, right? And so I think it can be tremendously effective. It can also go completely the other way. And the reality is, after a while, the Macedonians, they would have Facebook pages and that kind of thing, but what they really realized was that the best way to get their stories to spread was to go and use fake accounts to drop them into Facebook groups, pro-Trump Facebook groups. And so you had a similar thing where people were rallying together because they had a similar political point of view. They wanted to support a candidate. But because of that element, because of that group dynamic, suddenly they became these honeypots for people to drop conspiracy stuff and fake information in there, and the stuff went viral. It worked really well. So it's unfortunately, like a lot of what happens with technology, it can sort of go both ways.
What do you think about governance structures, like what Wikipedia, for instance, has, and the way it maintains truth or some semblance of it with editors, hierarchies of editors, and still there's people contributing information, and somehow it seems to sort of maybe work.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways Wikipedia works really well. But it's very hard to get that not 1% to 3% of people who do like 99% of the work, as is the case. You have like the super editors on Wikipedia. So it becomes a community building challenge. What is the motivation for people to get involved in these things? There have been projects to try and do kind of crowdsourced fact checking, and it's just hard to keep people motivated and into it. And as much as Wikipedia really works, it also has a lot of problem with the fact that so many of the people who are engaged in that are men, and there's very little pages about famous women scientists and women who've been prominent in other ways. So you have, the bias of your community starts to represent it, and it can turn out to be a great service, but you still, of course, there's always more work to do. Yeah.
And different cultures as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, depending, if it's stuff from English language culture, you see it all over Wikipedia or Japanese anime, I suppose. And outside of that, in other countries, it can be a bit of a ghost town, yeah.
One more question from this side. That third row. And then we go to that.
In the UK, and I don't know if this translates as well in America, we have a history of the news being an acceptable level of inaccurate, I would say. So we've had The Sun and, say, the Hillsborough disaster. We've had The Times and a false story about about Muslims adopting Christian children, and the Daily Mail corrects Twitter accounts, etc. With that in mind, and I suppose the acceptance that people have realized the news is going to be, if not explicitly false, deeply politicized, why should people care whether or not the news is accurate when we've in some ways just become so accustomed to it being slanted one way or the other? Weird question. I'm a journalist myself to be asking, but what?
Are you having a crisis of confidence right here? Is this, have I?
Every single day.
There are a lot of people who feel that way in journalism, I think, right now. So I think that one, this ethic that we've had for hundreds of years in journalism. Side note, I used to run a blog about corrections, so I'm a complete nerd for newspaper corrections, and used to read the UK tabloid corrections, which are unbelievable, like the stuff that gets reported. I know the problem is the stuff that doesn't get corrected, though. But you're right, there is a certain acceptable level where journalists and news organizations can make mistakes. The question is, are they making them in good faith or in bad faith, and are they owning up to them publicly? That's kind of like the contract we've had with readers for a long time. And yes, I mean, there are a lot of people who argue that having an overt partisan leaning and knowing that the Mail leans this way and the Guardian leans that way is actually a good thing, because readers can sort of understand that bias, and it's very clear in a lot of ways. But there's also good reporting in both, right? And so this, I think it's overall kind of worked. Where it becomes a difference is, are people deliberately introducing errors? Are people deliberately withholding critical information? And when they make a mistake, are they refusing to correct it? And so that's the difference between responsible and irresponsible media, I think. And because it's been around for so long and has worked that way for so long, I do think people have been come to know that, and it's come to feel very comfortable, which is why the way things are working so now is completely uncomfortable for so many of us. And it's, frankly, on one level, like a cognitive level, a huge challenge to suddenly not know you're reading the Mail, but to look at a news feed that might have the Mail and some site created 3 days ago by somebody in Macedonia and have this and that, and to not be able to understand that I'm reading the Mail and I understand the framework of the world that the Mail exists in, and I understand that they will probably correct an error if people yell at them enough about it. And that's very different than us sitting there and scanning at a feed that mixes so many things together. It's something that none of us are comfortable with, including in some cases journalists, I think. So it's a huge difference, and I don't think it's something that we're going to adapt to very quickly. It's going to take time for sure.
Let's go to this side and then questions. Maybe one from the back there.
Do you think that there is scope for some way that algorithms can become subject to more effective democratic scrutiny, like kind of public challenge? Or do they just remain this opaque thing which has more and more control?
I think that we're moving towards potentially figuring out some models for that. There is a lot of people advocating for greater transparency in the algorithms that are making decisions about our lives. I think it's something that politicians are looking into more and understanding how much they really do decide of what we see and what we engage with and decisions made about us in our life. I haven't seen a model for it yet. That's the downside. It's like I don't think there's a template that exists. Facebook is not going to allow a government body, probably nor should it, to go and inspect its code, right? But is there a way to have some kind of disclosure about what gets weighted, in this algorithm? Here are all the things that we throw into the black box, and here are the ways that we roughly weight them, because they're not going to give the super secret sauce. So understand that if you have these characteristics, or if this piece of content has these characteristics, it may get a high result or a low result. And so I think Facebook has become a bit more transparent about that. But we do need some kind of a workable model. And I actually think we're at the point now where these companies have been so beat up that if there was one that still protected their intellectual property, they would probably be open to figuring that out. And so I'm somewhat hopeful that we may get to that point, but this is also a place where the threat of regulation, I think, is really great. So like threaten them to see what they can come up with, and also to have some, some independent bodies, whether it's NGOs, schools, other places, to kind of put forward some proposals. I think this is an area that we should put a lot more work into, for sure.
So can I just pick one
Yeah.
point that you were saying? You said you thought Facebook shouldn't share their code. Why? I see why they wouldn't share their code, but what's the motivation behind why they shouldn't share? Because it's open source.
I mean,
eyes,
yeah, no.
in some sense our property.
I think it's more just, I think it's so unlikely to never happen
Of course, yeah.
that, I think, and I think part of it is also like, if that's the demand we make of Facebook, then Facebook is going to sit there and be like, you're an idiot. We're not going to do that,
Sure, yeah.
And so I think making requests that are actually going to move the ball along,
Yeah.
but are also like reasonable. Like I don't think they should rule everything, and just because they're a public company and economically driven, that just because it's good for their business they should be able to do it. But I think the chances of Facebook open sourcing the news feed algorithm are basically zero,
Yeah.
and I can't imagine anybody forcing them to do that. So
I mean, we used to say that about Microsoft open source, and now
Right.
look, they're embracing open source. Maybe 10 years time.
maybe it's true. I shouldn't rule it out completely, I suppose. It would be really great if we could figure out models, because open source, obviously, it can be way more secure, right? We can get at it and figure out what some of the flaws are earlier. It would be amazing to figure out models where that they're able to be a for-profit company, but they're able to do that, and it makes the system that much secure. I mean, it's sort of leading into the realm where people make the argument, I think it's true, that these companies are very different from anything that we've had in society because they are the default platforms of speech. They should have new responsibilities and new requirements on them, but I don't know that we have a template to figure out exactly what those are.
I mean, I, for one, would trust Facebook if I knew this is what the code was that was running and it was not somehow harming me or something. There might be some actual incentive for Facebook to do it, not that they're
Yeah.
probably going to do it. But.
Yeah, I mean, I think they realize they have a lot of trust to rebuild, and they're trying. They've made a lot of changes. I mean, this used to be a company that gave you nothing when you would reach out to them a story and you had found some stuff and they would say nothing, or they'd give you boilerplate. And now, it's like you can't get them to leave you alone, right? They want to talk and talk. I mean, mostly off the record, which is not very helpful, but. They have, and this is one of the things that's maybe not very helpful, is like their PR staff has grown by leaps and bounds, and so now they're all over it. But that's the window dressing. We have to get at the actual behavior of the system.
I was just wondering, given what you've said about the new funding model that exists for most of, if not the vast majority of media nowadays, what advice you'd give to yourself if you were, say, 20 and you were...
You don't think I'm 20? That's
22 maybe.
Okay, thanks.
And I was wondering just basically what you'd advise yourself in terms of having a career in journalism, given how things are now, and given the funding models that exist for journalists and for news organizations.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, one thing is, I do think that you need to understand the environment you're working in. So being familiar with the basics of how websites work and internet networking, like things that sound like they may be completely obscure, what have you, but really understanding the underpinning of it helps then understand why some of the business models have evolved the way they have. So I think for journalists, regardless of your beat, if you're planning to work in digital, which if you were 22, yeah, I would say you should expect that that's going to be a big part of it. I think understanding some of the fundamentals. The other piece is that specialization does tend to be valued a lot, I think, in the world of journalism today. If you are the person associated with one particular thing, that's often going to serve you better than being a particular generalist. And the other thing on business models is that I think we're seeing a bit of a swing back. And I work at BuzzFeed, a place that has always said we will never have a paywall. We're not going to ask people to pay for our content, our journalism. We're going to work with social networks. Like, this has been the philosophy of the company since day one, long before it had a news division. But we're seeing a huge kind of shift in a lot of places to subscriptions and to going back to trying to find that direct relationship with a reader rather than passing it off to a bunch of programmatic advertising companies. And so I think that there's a lot more business models in journalism today than there were when I was when I was 22. And it's nice to see that subscriptions and close relationship with readers is actually one of the options for people, because I think there's only so many places that can try to be scale and completely free. There's a big argument for being smaller but having a very close relationship. And I think that's probably the last piece of advice is think about what community you can be a part of and where your expertise can be valued and where you can also lift up and elevate people that are part of that so that they see you as somebody who is a strong and positive actor in that larger ecosystem.
I think there's a question there.
Thank you for the talk. I was wondering if there's any projects to educate young children on democracy and news, either sponsored by Facebook or the state.
There are. This is one of the things that's happened since 2016 is suddenly everybody's talking about media literacy. And so there are projects around the world in so many different countries now where governments are doing it. But yes, absolutely, Facebook and Google are just throwing out cash left and right. This is a great time to try and get money out of them, by the way. They feel very guilty. So you should think about how you can extract cash from them. So what have I advocated? Threatening them with regulation and extracting cash from them, right? So there are a lot of initiatives. I live in Canada. I can think of at least 3 off the top of my head. 2 of which did not exist before 2016. And so one of the nice things is there is funding flowing into that. One of the things, however, we have to, I think, be really cautious of is there was a university in the United States that used to require all of their first-year students, this is long before all this, to have a first-year media literacy course. And it was a great program, and it was really celebrated. The problem is that nobody wants to take a media literacy course. You see that on the class schedule, and it's just next, right? And so they had to require it of everybody. So the challenge, I think, is figuring out how you integrate this stuff in existing frameworks that people are already engaged in rather than forcing everyone into a media literacy class. So some of the more effective ones seem to find ways of doing that to not make it seem like eating your vegetables, but actually seem like, would you like to show your parents that they don't know what they're talking about? Here are 3 things you can do to show that Facebook post that your dad shared is garbage, So there's a lot of that. It's encouraging, but it's not the only solution. And it's also not just young people. I think all of us are struggling at every age, and there is some recent research showing that in the United States, it was actually older people who had more of a propensity to share fake or very hyperpartisan content. So it's a challenge for all of us, and I think we shouldn't shame anybody about it, and we should all realize this is something we are all struggling with, and to be aware of that as you're out there consuming information.
Question back here.
Hi there. Nation states have deliberately putting out propaganda online. I mean, have you uncovered any of that at all? I mean, how much have you seen, if any at all, rather than just the criminal gangs?
Absolutely, there is state-sponsored trolling that takes place. There is absolutely there's always been state-sponsored propaganda, right? So that has absolutely moved into the digital realm. Russia has obviously gotten a lot of attention, and to a certain extent, it's deserved. I think actually they realized many years ago that their power they weren't as powerful militarily. They had, post-Soviet era, they lost a lot of the satellite countries. They were starting to lose their influence over them as well. And so they had to come up with a new way to exert their power, but to do it when they weren't as sort of powerful as, the Democratic West Alliance. And a general came up with the idea of what was called hybrid warfare, of using the information space and dominating that. And I think Russia has been very effective at it. I think also the United States and countries in the West, while they may not be hiring trolls to go and work for them, they are also conscious of trying to influence the information space. And we should always pay attention to what our own governments are up to as well. China is, I think, interesting. If you look at the information space within China, it's a mixture of obviously very, very tight censorship, especially under the current leadership there, where they, even though they're not necessarily having a government censor look at everything, the fact is that all of the big social networks in China, all of the big technology companies in China employ their own censors because they know if they do not censor the things they could get into huge trouble. So there's a massive censorship apparatus there. At the same time, They also kind of practice flooding the zone. So if there's a lot of conversation about a kind of touchy subject, yes, some of that will be censored and removed. But what they'll also do is kind of flood the zone with innocuous content from people who are, hired or working for the government to sort of, drown that out. So kind of a white noise approach to doing that. China is less, it seems to have less of an approach of like hiring trolls to, go after Americans, but they certainly do try to work a lot with, their expat communities to sort of, strengthen the views of China among them and to help that sort of propagate through the society there. So I think there are a lot of copycats of Russia in particular. China is a very different thing. I don't think other countries can really emulate their model. But it seems like it's the Russian model that's really taking off. And I mean, we've seen this in elections that, there are efforts, often not by the nation state, but by some political parties to kind of engage in this stuff or encourage it. So I think it's a reality. It's not going away, but the awareness of it deters nation states to a certain extent. It also makes them go more underground, which is the thing I worry about. Like, what have we not seen? That's always the big question.
Last couple of questions. One over there. Yeah, right there, yeah.
So with all this talk of fake news becoming more and more prevalent and, regulation sort of probably still a few years off, do you think fake news can become its own enemy in the sense that it becomes so prevalent, like 90% of the stuff on the internet is fake news, that people shift from the default position of, oh, everything on the internet is true, to everything is false, which sort of puts us back in the pre-internet age. I mean, like you can only trust what you see or hear from your trusted friends. So do you think that's possible?
Like a trust inversion, huh? I mean, I would hate to be in the in-between phase of the trust inversion. That sounds like a horrible time where it's like, 60% or 40% everything is fake and nobody really knows. That sounds like bad things will happen. But I do think over time, there is a necessity to kind of shift. Like there's that famous saying of, trust but verify. So this idea which you sort of expressed, like the default was, well, I'm seeing something, it's come from a friend, or I'm seeing something, it's from what appears to be a news website, I'm going to apply a certain level of trust. And we do have to flip that to a certain extent to be verify and then trust. We have to be a little more judicious with how we're applying trust to things. We have to raise that level of skepticism. But the danger in that is we can't get to the place where nothing matters and we trust nothing, because then, what holds us together in society? And that is the inversion I definitely don't want us to get to. I don't think we'll get so saturated with fake stuff. What's frankly far more prevalent than 100% fake stuff is stuff that is very misleading, stuff that's very torqued, stuff that leaves stuff out. And there's a lot of times where mainstream journalism can fit any of those descriptions, where we don't do our jobs properly as well, even though we maybe are making a good faith effort. So I worry less about the 100% fakes, and I do worry more, though, just how do we get ourselves to adapt to this new universe so that we're not in a place where we have no trust for anything, but where we also are kind of reducing that instant trust so that we apply some basic tests to things before really, reading it or sharing it or that kind of thing.
Last question right here.
Hi. Thanks. I thought it was a great talk. I think my question is going back to the solutions. So we talked about kind of regulation, we talked about educating people about what they're reading. But to what extent do you think that actually the very models that caused the problem in the first place could be the solution? So in actual real life, we see very positive deployment of machine learning, AI models. So actually, could the answer be just a game of catch-up? Let's build a load of models that can identify the fake faces on the internet, for example, and just be more sophisticated than those causing the problem?
I think it's absolutely a piece of it, but I think there's certain things that, and it's also hard to predict how good AI can get. Like right now, for example, if you look at Facebook, they feel like I think they said there's something like 97% effective at spotting ISIS content and removing it automatically on Facebook. They feel they're really, really good at that. But then when it comes to hate speech, they acknowledge that they're not as good at it and that it's a real problem for AI. And so they rely on human oversight to do that. And so I don't feel like we're going to get to the point, especially at the scale Facebook is at and the breadth of content on it, where you can 100% just kind of turn it over to AI. I think they will 100% get a lot better. But something like hate speech, to understand the context of something, a word that could be okay in this post, but is actually very harmful in that one. I mean, even humans can sit and have a debate about it, right? It's hard to write the rules for that, which at the end of the day, is going to determine how good that is, how well that's going to work. So I think we'll see a lot of improvement. They have to be a part of the solution. But I think to a certain extent, we have to recognize that humans have to be part of this equation too, as a fail-safe on it, as an oversight on it, because I just don't know that we can get all the way there from AI. Although at the same time, I can't predict how good it's going to get. I hope it gets a lot better. But there's always bias in any system, and I do think there's bias among humans, so AI can help us with that sometimes. There's bias in AI, and I think human oversight will be necessary there too.
I think we've sort of run out of time. I'm sorry, there's many questions, but there will be drinks outside. Let's thank Craig.
Thank you.